I used to absolutely hate summer bass fishing, but eventually I realized something. Summer bass fishing didn't suck. I did. Because once I finally understood how bass actually behave in summer, everything changed. And now, to be honest with you, summer is honestly one of my favorite times to fish because the patterns get so predictable once you start paying attention to the right things. Number one, I started fishing the nasty stuff, right? One of the biggest game changers for me, punching heavy mats in thick vegetation. And for years, I avoided it because it looked like the fastest way to lose every lure I owned. But once I figured out a proper punch setup, straight shank hook, peg tungsten, compact bait, everything changed. Now, granted, tungsten's ridiculously 900% more than it was 12 months ago, but nonetheless. But if you're interested in a punch setup, I actually have a video on that setup, and I'll throw that at the end of this video. Now, here's the thing. Bass love using thick vegetation for shade, oxygen, ambush cover, and cooler water, right? Meanwhile, everyone else is beating visible shoreline cover to death. And guys, some of the most violent bites of my life came from underneath those mats. It's not finesse fishing, it's combat fishing, right? And it's a big fish technique. Number two, I stopped fishing fast all day. Early on, I thought fishing harder meant fishing faster. Burning spinner baits, burning chatter baits, and yes, power fishing absolutely works a lot of times during those low light periods, but bites have a tendency to turn off once that summer sun gets high. And a lot of those bass stop wanting to chase. That's when finesse fishing completely changed things for me. You got drop shots, Ned rigs, dragging a Texas rig painfully slow, and honestly, that was hard for me because I love covering water. But slowing down during the hottest parts of the day dramatically increased my catch rate. Sometimes summer fishing isn't about making fish react. Sometimes it's about putting an easy meal directly right in front of their face. Number three, I started fishing deeper, right? This one hurt my ego a little bit because for years I spent almost all my time shallow. Docks, laydowns, grass edges, the bank. But eventually I realized something. I was literally driving over giant bass just to go fish for smaller ones on the bank. Summer bass, especially a lot of the bigger fish, often move offshore following bait, oxygen, stable conditions, right? And that's why those ledges and offshore humps and brush piles, channel swings, deep grass becomes so important. All right, number four, I started following the shade and wind. Summer bass don't disappear, they just reposition. And one of the biggest things that I overlooked early on, shade. Docks, overhanging trees, shadow lines, even tiny isolated patches of shade can hold fish. But when I started combining shade with wind, that's where things got really good. Because wind pushes plankton, which positions bait fish, which increases oxygen, and it breaks up that light penetration. And whenever you do that, the bass are going to follow, right? This is why those wind-blown banks become absolute feeding zones. But you gotta let those conditions develop, right? A wind shift doesn't instantly reposition fish. So watch bait movement, watch conditions build, then fish it intelligently. It usually takes a sustained wind of around 12 to 24 hours to set up wind-blown shore activity. Number five, I started to use a deep dive app like a cheat code, right? Especially for new anglers, the deep dive app can shorten the learning curve big time because successful summer fishing is usually about pattern recognition. And this app helps connect the dots faster. You can track water clarity, wind direction, lake levels, stream flows, feeding windows. You got satellite imagery, seasonal lure recommendations, and tournament winning patterns. And honestly, one of my favorite features for beginners is the bait selector tool because half the battle when you're learning is simply knowing what to throw. So if you're new and are struggling with sheer information, the Deep Dive app will shave years off your learning curve, and I'll throw the link in the description below. Number six, I learned positioning matters. For years, I just pull up on a spot and start firing casts. No thought, no angles, no stealth. Now I think about positioning constantly, right? Because positioning affects casting angles, lure presentation, shadows that you're casting, noise, and whether fish know you're there before the bait arrives. So one huge adjustment for me, I became way more aware of the sunlight and shadows. Bass are extremely sensitive to overhead movement, right? Especially in clear water. And once I started approaching fish more like hunting instead of just fan casting, my bites went way up. Number seven, I became obsessive about stealth, right? This might be the most underrated summer fishing skill there is because bass just don't see danger, right? They feel it. So if you're new to bass fishing, bass have a lateral line that detects vibration and pressure changes in the water, right? Which means if they can detect your lure vibrating underwater, they can definitely detect your trolling motors, any hull slap, paddle impacts, dropping your pliers on the bottom of your boat, heavy footsteps, pedal drive noise. And the bigger fish, they're usually the first to spook because they survived longer and experienced more pressure and some sore mouth over the years. Once I started treating every approach like hunting, everything changed. All right, number 8. This one's massive. I learned to skip my baits. Skipping used to absolutely humble me. But once I learned how to consistently skip a bait way back under docks and those overhangs, I started reaching fish most anglers simply can't touch. Now, some baits skip way better than others, right? Your wacky worms, your Texas rigs, your Yamatanukis, those type of lures, all awesome places to start. And honestly, I'd recommend learning on spinning gear first, like on a wacky rig, and then later trying to master the bait caster, which is a little more difficult. But once it clicks, you start unlocking high percentage water everywhere. Now, it can be frustrating with the inevitable backlashes in your future, but it will be a fair price to pay when you start fishing with more accuracy and start pulling out water donkeys that are hiding deep under those docks and overhangs. A lot of anglers don't have the skill to reach them. You can't. Number 9, I quit fishing history, and this one changed everything, right? I used to go back to spots just because they worked before. That was a mistake, right? Bass constantly reposition based off of weather and water temp and bait movement and fishing pressure and oxygen and current, you name it. Just because fish were there last week or even yesterday doesn't mean they'll be there today. So I stopped fishing memories, right? And I start fishing current conditions. Instead of asking, where did I catch them? I started asking, where should they be right now? And that mindset shift, right? It completely changed how I break down lakes. Now, to be fair, I am sure all of you have some pet bass that don't move all summer, right? You know they're there and you've caught them multiple times. But a lot of bass will move depending on a lot of factors. So if you want to be a better angler overall and learn to read the conditions and allow that to inform your decisions versus simply fishing history or fishing for pet bass, I highly recommend learning the conditions. It'll make you a much well-rounded angler. Number 10, I actually learned my electronics, right? At first, my fish finder looked like complete nonsense, right? Blobs, lines, squiggles, no clue what I was looking at. And honestly, a lot of anglers spend thousands on electronics only to use them as really expensive depth finders and temperature readings. That was almost me too. But once I finally took the time to learn what I was seeing, everything changed. I learned how to identify bait fish and brush piles and rock, hard bottom, contour changes, suspended fish, offshore structure, whether something was a bass or whether it wasn't with FFS. And once all that clicked, I stopped wasting time fishing dead water and started spending way more time around actual fish. And learning side scan may have been the biggest unlock in my fishing career. It literally changed the amount of quality fish that I was catching. Number 11, get off the bank and unlock more water. Right? One of the biggest things that changed my fishing was simply getting off the bank into a fishing kayak. And look, there are absolutely big bass caught from shore every single day. I get it. But when you're bank fishing, you're usually limited to a tiny percentage of the lake, while the majority of the fish in unpressured water sits completely out of reach, right? Getting into my kayak unlocks 95% more of the lake. And suddenly you can reach offshore structure, hidden grass lines, isolated cover, creek channels and docks and points and ledges and backwater areas, unpressured fish that most bank anglers simply can't get to. And honestly, some of the best areas on the lake are the places most anglers are unwilling or unable to access. And also, you don't need some crazy expensive setup to get started, right? There's a lot of Facebook Marketplace finds. You can get into a kayak fairly inexpensively. And look, since I just recommended you getting into a kayak and opening more of the water up to you, make sure that you do it safely. Make sure you head over to KFAS, Kayak Fishing Advanced Safety Training, and sign up for the basic course, right? It's affordable, beginner friendly, and comes with a few hours of instruction around PFD safety, weather awareness, trip planning, hazard recognition, self-rescue, equipment safety, and making smarter decisions out on the water. Because at the end of the day, the goal is to make it home safely after every trip. And now, if you want to keep leveling up your fishing, I'm going to give you 2 videos. This one right here breaks down the chatterbait, one of the best search baits ever made for covering water and triggering those reaction strikes. And the other is the swim jig. This thing flat out catches giants and might honestly be the most underrated lure in bass fishing. Thanks for watching, guys. See you out in the water.